Hello, Merry Christmas, and thank you for joining me. I'm Dana Bash in for Frederica Whitfield. We start this hour overseas. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he is summoning U.S. Ambassador Daniel Shapiro after the U.S. allowed a UN resolution condemning Israeli settlements, and they allowed it to pass. The two are meeting, we just learned, tonight. Israel also summoned the ambassadors of 10 other countries that voted for the resolution. A foreign ministry spokesman said the meetings are, quote, to express deep anger and dissatisfaction as a result of the vote that countries that consider themselves friends of Israel. The vote sparked a bipartisan backlash from many here in the U.S. who thought the United States should have backed Israel and voted against the measure, which would have killed it. CNN correspondent Oren Lieberman is joining me now from Jerusalem. And Oren, tell us about this new development, this meeting that we now know is going to happen tonight with the U.S. ambassador to Israel and the Israeli prime minister. Obviously underscores the urgency.
Absolutely. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had promised a series of diplomatic steps, and they are harsh steps. Worth noting that of the 11 ambassadors called for meetings, for reprimanding meetings from the Israeli government to those ambassadors from those countries that voted for the Security Council resolution, it is only the U.S. ambassador that will meet with Netanyahu. The others will meet with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That shows you the extent of the anger to which Netanyahu has directed at Secretary of State Kerry and at President Barack Obama for this resolution. He's said it before. I wouldn't be surprised to hear him say it again. He holds them responsible for what he calls this anti-Israel resolution, for not casting a veto, as he says, has been precedent from Americans for previous decades. So he's called Ambassador Dan Shapiro, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, to this meeting to express his displeasure at it. And there have been a number of other steps, not only against other countries that voted for it, but also against the United Nations. This is very much Netanyahu expressing his fury at this resolution. And there may be more steps in the days and weeks ahead. Dana, what's also worth pointing out is that Netanyahu could have easily waited just a few weeks so he didn't have to work with President Obama. He would have had President-elect Trump in. He's made it clear he's very excited to work with the new president, and he would have had an ambassador, a new ambassador, Trump's appointment to the Israeli ambassador, who's far more in line with his own views. All he had to do was wait a few weeks. Instead, in a measure to express his anger, he's called in the current ambassador, a President Barack Obama appointee, and told him how angry he is at this vote.
You know, that is so interesting. You make a really important point that he's calling in an ambassador who is the lamest of lame ducks. Everybody who works for President Obama, including the president himself, are right now. So, again, is this kind of a show of force, a kind of a power play here? Or how would you describe it, knowing the way the prime minister works the way you do since you've been covering him?
I would say it's a show of force. He wants to make it very clear, not only to President Obama, but to the rest of the world, how angry he is at this resolution. He did something that's very unusual at the cabinet meeting earlier on today. He spoke in English. That cabinet meeting is specifically directed to Israel, to Israelis. So to speak in English is to directly address the rest of the world, and I think it's safe to say, in this case, directly address the U.S. to express his anger. He knows he gets a clean slate so soon, so this is very intentional. Nothing here is accidental. This is all very carefully calculated and decided upon by Netanyahu.
Fascinating. What a great point. Thank you, Oren Lieberman, for that report. And joining me now live is Congressman Engel, a Democrat from New York, who is also the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for coming in on this holiday to be with me. I want to start right away with what Oren was just reporting about the fact that the U.S. ambassador to Israel is going to meet with the Israeli prime minister tonight. What does that tell you, especially in light of the fact that this ambassador is not going to be there for very long, and it's going to be a whole new diplomatic world in just a couple of weeks?
Well, you know, I just got back from Israel, and I had a meeting with the prime minister. I, of course, had a meeting with our ambassador, and this is something that's very tense, and I think the prime minister wants to show his anger at what he regards as a betrayal by the United States. You know, Dana, the problem in the United Nations is that Israel can never get a fair shake. There are always a vast majority of countries lining up against it, no matter what it does. And the Palestinians know this, and they play the game. And Israel relies on the United States to protect them and to veto resolutions that are one-sided and ridiculous. And this resolution regardless of how anyone feels about settlements, was so one-sided and so ridiculous, leaving the entire onus, placing the entire onus on Israel, and not saying anything about the Palestinians. It's just ridiculous, and I think the United States made a mistake. We should have vetoed that resolution. We have vetoed similar resolutions in the past, and I think that the administration going out the door to do this sends a terrible message to the rest of the world.
Do you think it was a betrayal by President Obama and his administration?
Well, I don't know if I would use the word betrayal, but I would certainly say it was the wrong move. I think it was a mistake. I think that the Obama administration is ending, and I don't think this is a sort of one parting shot to the bow, and I don't think that that really was appropriate.
So why do you think they did it?
I don't know. I can't get into anybody's mind. Obviously, there's...
Have you asked them? I mean, I'm guessing that you're... the phone lines are burning up with you trying to reach them, since you have made your displeasure pretty clear.
Yes, well, you know, they say that they are opposed to settlements, and that's the reason why they didn't veto the resolution. But you know what? A resolution could have mentioned settlements and could have been more balanced or even-handed. This was the worst, and this was similar to another resolution several years ago that the United States vetoed. So I know there's been a little change in language here and there, but basically it's the same resolution. And it just seems to me that this whole situation is just ridiculous and a mistake made by the United States. You know, Abba Eban, when I was a kid, who was one of the ministers of Israel, used to say at the United Nations, one of the Arab nations could put forth a resolution saying the earth is flat and it would automatically get 70 votes. And I think that anything having to deal with Israel in the United Nations, it's so biased and one-sided against Israel that I think it just brings discredit on the United Nations. I think it just shows that the United Nations is not even-handed, that Israel can do no right. And what's really ridiculous is at a time when hundreds of thousands of people are dying in Syria, you have genocide in South Sudan, you have people being killed all over the country. The United Nations does nothing about any of that, and I would say that the United States has done nothing about a lot of things in Syria over the past several years. Well, and so what do? They condemn Israel for settlements. Prime Minister Netanyahu said to me just a few days ago that he is for a two-state solution and that he believes there should be two states for two peoples, meaning that the Palestinians have a right to their state, but so do the Jews have a right to their state. And he said that he would meet with the Palestinians at any time, at any place, with no preconditions. But the Palestinians, unfortunately, have decided they don't want to meet. They just want to use the United Nations to whip Israel and to embarrass Israel. And I think that for us to fall into that trap is a really grievous error.
Well, I want to bring in a Palestinian voice. I spoke a few minutes ago to a senior Palestinian diplomat. Here's his take on this.
It's a victory for the cause of peace, because if Mr. Netanyahu means the two-state solution, he should be happy and celebrating this resolution. It's a victory for internationalism and the international responsibility to bring about peace and security worldwide. And this is not a resolution against Israel. This is a resolution against Israel's expansion.
Your reaction?
Well, you know, every time the Palestinians talk about settlements, it really makes me laugh, and the hypocrisy is just unbelievable. In 1948, and you got to go back in history, the United Nations passed a Security Council resolution dividing historic Palestine into two states, and they called it a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews accepted the partition, and the Palestinians did not. Instead, they attacked Israel and tried to drive it into the sea. And for 19 years after that, through 1967, there were no settlements. Settlements didn't exist, and the Palestinians and the Arabs did not make peace with Israel. So this nonsense about how settlements are an obstacle to peace, if you want to make peace, you make peace. And if you want to have excuses as to why you won't make peace, then you could find a million excuses. Oh. And that's what the Palestinian Authority is doing with its incitement against Israel, with its incitement against Jews, with all kinds of reasons. The two parties need to sit down and hammer out a two-state solution, which I support, not use the United Nations trying to embarrass Israel. And the United States shouldn't go along.
I want to talk about the sitting down in the future, because it is going to be a different world pretty soon. But before that, I want to put up, if our control room can put up a tweet from Ted Cruz, certainly not somebody you generally agree with on most issues, but he said that he said, there you see, spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu tonight to wish him happy Hanukkah and assure him of strong support in Congress, no U.S. money for UN until reversed. Is that bipartisan? Is that a bipartisan sentiment? He has said it. Lindsey Graham, a Republican in the Senate, has said it. Will you, as a leading Democrat on foreign affairs, go along with Republicans in cutting funding to the United Nations and maybe even aid to Palestinians because of this?
Well, I'd certainly take a good look at it. I certainly would. I think it's time for us to get together in a bipartisan move to just say that we're not going to stand for this nonsense. I mean, all we want is even-handedness and fairness, and that resolution was so disgusting and so biased that the thought that the United States could ever not veto it just sort of makes me sick to my stomach. So I do think there will be a lot of talking across lines because people are just disgusted. We want to see, again, I believe in a two-state solution, but two states for two peoples. And the Palestinians have not embraced that. You
are no political ally of Donald Trump. However, do you, in all candor, have hope that perhaps he, because he's for a million reasons, could come at this two-state solution, at Middle East peace, in a way that could have success that Barack Obama and his predecessors just didn't?
Well, I would hope so. I would hope so.
Will you help him do that?
I think when it comes to U.S. support for Israel, that support has always been bipartisan and should be bipartisan. And I'll do everything I can to keep it bipartisan, working with the new president, working with the Congress. We are concerned about Israel's well-being, and I will work with anyone to make sure the only democracy in the Middle East, our only true friend in the Middle East, and I think it's very important that we work with our friends instead of kicking them in the teeth.
So, Congressman, I want to end on a lighter note. You are very well known for your policy work and your decades in Congress, but you've told me on more than one occasion that more than anything else, your constituents in New York stop you and talk to you about seeing you at the State of the Union address. That's because you famously set up shop in a seat on the aisle in the House chamber in the early morning of that big address so that you can shake the president's hand. You did it for Obama and you did it for many past presidents. Will you do that for Donald Trump?
Well, I knew you were going to ask that question.
You did?
Look, the President of the United States is the President of the United States, and he becomes, or she becomes, all of our presidents. And I believe that. I was a Hillary Clinton supporter, but Donald Trump was elected president, and I think that greeting the president, I did it during the Bush years with both Bushes, the father and the son. I did it, of course, with Bill Clinton. And I see no reason not to do it with the President of the United States. And the President is going to be Donald Trump. And I think, again, the President of the United States is not just the President of the people who voted for him. He's all of our presidents. And Donald Trump will be our President. And so I would expect to, as I have for almost 30 years, shaking the President's hand at the State of the Union.
Congressman, I will see you at, 7 or 8 in the morning with your stack of files, stack of papers, making the House floor, that aisle seat, your office, on the first address, which will not be the State of the Union. It will be addressed to the nation, but it'll happen in short order. Thank you so much for coming in. Have a happy, happy holiday.
Thank you, Dana. This is what happens when you get interviewed by someone who knows you so well. You have a happy holiday, too.
Thanks, Congressman.
Thank you.
And up next, Donald Trump says he is starting to untangle himself from potential conflicts of interest ahead of Inauguration Day. The president-elect announces plans to shut down the Trump Foundation.